We're talking about lands of Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti, also referred to as the Afar Triangle, including the Assab and Massawa ports and the Dhenkalia province, which has key geopolitical value for Red Sea fishing and trading, as well as for political relationship with Saudi Arabia and Yemen across the Red Sea in the Middle East. The Afar Triangle is one of the hottest and driest regions in the world, and today the Afar number close to 3 million people in those regions. One of the most remarkable things about the Afar people is the way in which they continue to practice their ancient ways of life in today's modern world. Still today, the Afar maintain an agro-pastoral and nomadic lifestyle that is heavily dependent on animal and environmental conditions of the Afar Triangle. For subsistence, they practice animal husbandry, following their herds of livestock as they graze the seasonal Afar regions, along with fishing, salt mining, and some trading. Because of their agro-pastoral and nomadic lifestyle, control over their environment for the Afar people is crucial for their subsistence. But political oppression and Eritrean governments have historically, and especially today, threatened their indigenous right to their ancestral homelands. Andrew and Samantha will be talking a bit more about the situation in Eritrea. As I mentioned before, control over one's environment has been of central importance for the Afar people, since they depend directly on their homelands for agro-pastoral subsistence. But it's this control that has been contested for them so much by political struggles in Eritrea. Still today, the Afar people are being marginalized and bullied out of their ancestral homelands.
In the last 2 years, with 2 United Nations reports, one May 2013 and one in May 2014, as well as the current United Nations Commission of Inquiry into Human Rights Abuses in the area. The abuses carried out against the Red Sea Afar people have been taking place in Eritrea, specifically the Dhenkalia region along the Red Sea border. The perpetrators of these violations are the authorities of the government of Eritrea, led by Isaias Afwerki. These abuses have been occurring on an ongoing basis since 1991 and continue to occur, with the brunt of arrests and disappearances starting during the mid-1990s. When Eritrea gained independence in 1993, the Afar people enjoyed autonomous rule of the Eritrean province of Dhenkalia. However, the land, property, and economy of the Red Sea Afar became the focal point for confrontation between the Eritrean military and neighboring states. So here's the map. The main Afar towns victimized by the regime are Assab, Tio, Bori, Wade, Belu, Raheta, and Bur. They're all along the southeast, so just along in there. So in regards to mass murder and genocide, the Eritrean government has killed large amounts of Red Sea Afar elders, businessmen, and youth. Their shoot-to-kill policy, the Eritrean military personnel have orders to shoot to kill Eritrean citizens, including the Afar, as they attempt to flee the country. The policy was confirmed in the discussions and interviews held by Special Rapporteur Sheila Keith-Arue of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, with several former military personnel who have been required to implement it, as well as those who have survived from it. Many Afar have perished trying to escape. An Eritrean leader described consistent mass murder perpetrated by the government of Eritrea on the Afar people along the Red Sea coast. In 2002, 15 Afar leaders, including a member of the Regional Parliament of Dhenkalia, Ali Yusuf Mohammed, was executed. August 2, 2013, Major General Hamoud Kirakar ordered his Eritrean National Security to massacre a group of 29 Afar Eritrean Navy members after accusing them of planning to escape on a boat into Yemen. Under the order of Major General Kirakar, a fishing boat carrying 16 Afar youth, mostly students, were hit by Eritrean Navy gunships, causing the death by drowning. And prior to leaving Eritrea as a refugee, an Afar leader of over 4,000 people states that half of his community were killed by government security personnel. He testifies that 17 people were killed in one instance in 2001. There was a report collected in August 2011 which gives testimony and evidence provided by Afar refugees, mainly in the Aseta refugee camp in Ethiopia. The abuses include the mass murder of 25 Afar in Abetekom by Eritrean security forces, the murder of 30 unarmed men during the traditional ceremony in search for rain, the kidnapping of 15 young Afar men from the village of Wade, all of whom have not been heard from since, torture, murder, and sexual assault of Afar prisoners, and the rape of women by the 31st Reconnaissance Unit in Dida to Eritrea. Traveling within Eritrea is extremely restricted and requires travel permits, which is often difficult or impossible to obtain. There's also frequent checkpoints between cities, and the freedom to leave the country is even more tightly controlled. Exit visas are required to travel abroad and are not granted for men between the ages of 18 and 54 and women between the ages of 18 and 47. It also is a required diaspora tax, which is a 2% tax levied by unofficial agents of governments involving threats, harassment, and intimidation, and is a prerequisite for Eritreans who wish to return home. Eritrea currently makes up the second largest group after Syrians, making the perilous journey in small boats across the Mediterranean to Europe. Tens of thousands more remain in neighboring countries. And there are 200,000 Red Sea Afar who have fled to neighboring countries, mostly Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Yemen. Recent stats from the ARRA in Ethiopia, which is the Authority for Refugee and Returnee Administration, shows that over half of Eritrean refugees are of Afar ethnicity. So Eritrean nationals who are repatriated after a failed refugee or asylum application usually disappear upon return. The practice of enforced disappearances is used to intimidate people, to install a climate of fear, and deter people from claiming their rights. While unknown number of Eritreans have disappeared, the most prominent case includes 11 political leaders, members of the G15, and 10 journalists, all of whom were arrested in 2001. To date, the government has refused to provide any information on their fate, despite continued pressure from the United Nations Human Rights Commission. A former elected official in Eritrea and member of a highly respected Afar family was a key witness of human rights violations within the country. In retaliation for speaking out against the human rights abuses, Eritrean military security intelligence soldiers abducted his father, who was another respected Afar elder within the community. In May 1999, Major General Karakari ordered the kidnapping of 15 members of Afar leaders, including political, cultural, and business leaders, from the town of Carousel in Denkalia, in the deliberate and systematic oppression of the Afar people, to intimidate and destroy their political will, their economic base, and subsequently murdering them. Detention in Eritrea is an ordinary fact of life, experienced in inordinate numbers of individuals, men and women, young and old, including children. Detention centers range from the official to the unofficial, located above ground or underground. Some are metal containers where prisoners were kept in extreme heat, others were fenced areas providing no shelter. An Afar leader was accused of trying to flee Ethiopia in collaboration as a spy to overthrow Eritrean government. He was subsequently jailed for a year and a half, kept underground, and subject to electric shock. Upon his release from jail, he and 200 members of his clan attempted to flee Eritrea while the government chased them. While trying to cross the border into Ethiopia, many Afar members were killed, including 3 of his children who were killed by landmines. Arbitrary arrests and incommunicado detentions were also carried out in the aftermath of the attempted coup d'etat on January 21, 2013, dubbed the Forto incident. Over 50 people, including public figures, were arrested and detained with no information as to their whereabouts, nor have they appeared before any court of law. Under Article 23.2 under the Constitution, it does not provide protection for the Afar people, stating that all lands and all natural resources below and above the surface of the territory of Eritrea belong to the state. The interest citizens have in this land shall be determined by law. So this article expropriates the indigenous rights of Afar nomads to the soil they use for the survival as pastoral nomads. It allows central authorities to appropriate the traditional lands and resources of the pastoralists and sell them to foreign resource extraction companies. It allows large nationalities to displace the small nationalities from the traditional lands and pursuits. Special Rapporteur Keith Ruth described how the Eritrean regime is destroying the basis of the Afar economy, which is animal husbandry and fishing. The Special Rapporteur discusses how the regime confiscates Afar businesses, and another one of the Eritrean government's strategies to further alienate the Eritrean Afar from the Afar now in Djibouti and Ethiopia was to change the Latin scripts of the Afar alphabet used for decades among the Afar people across the Horn region. According to the National Service Proclamation, national service was initially supposed to be about 18 months. However, following the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea from 1998 to 2000, in 2012, the government introduced the Warsayikalo Development Campaign, which extended the length of conscription indefinitely. The military police carries out routine conscription roundups, known as GFAs, on the street, public venues, workplaces, and homes, with the goal of rounding up those considered fit to serve, draft evaders, and those who escape from national service, including minors. Opposing the military in these situations can often lead to on-the-spot execution, as deadly force is permitted against those resisting the attempt to flee, or resisting or attempting to flee, in violation of the fundamental right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Children who resist army service are often tortured or killed by the Eritrean authorities, and some of the military camps, including Sawa, are some of the harshest, with students committing suicide or falling ill and dying. A former elected official of the government of Eritrea testified that women were left vulnerable because the Afar government abducted their husband and forced them into unlimited military service.
The most significant development on the international stage has been the establishment of a UN Human Rights Council Commission inquiry. Prior to this one, there's only been 3 other commission inquiries in its history, which I've listed here. The commission was established in 2014. It's quite a broad mandate. The mandate is to investigate all alleged violations of human rights in Eritrea since it became an independent state in 1991. The Commission is working to identify patterns of systemic violations of human rights, recommend how to improve the general human rights situation in Eritrea, and ensure accountability in the future. The Commission also aims to raise awareness of the situation of human rights in the country. Now, legally, the Commission is operating under international law with existing human rights treaties as well as regular practices under customary international law. A written report is actually expected later this month in June and is going to be presented to the Human Rights Council at the UN and will eventually be presented to the General Assembly in October of this year. In March of this year, there's an update provided by the Commission, update of its investigation. Now, the update was not specific to the case of the Afar, but actually the general human rights situation in the whole country. So I'll actually be probably repeating a lot of the stuff that we found that Sam spoke about earlier. The investigation found that systemic human rights violations are occurring throughout Eritrea. Further, it has found that many of the violations that Sam described as occurring to the Afar have been occurring nationwide. The Commission found very clear systemic patterns of human rights violations and identified 4 main patterns of these violations. The first was the curtailing of public freedoms, the indefinite national service, which has served as a breeding ground for human rights violations, widespread arbitrary arrest and detention, and widespread ill treatment and torture in the military and in detention. Essentially, the Eritrean regime has instituted an unofficial policy of no war, no peace, which the regime has used as a pretext to disregard all international human rights law. Under this pretext, the whole society is militarized. National service is universal and of indefinite duration. National service can either be for military or civil assignments, which most citizens beginning at age 17 spend the rest of their lives in the force service, and which they are compensated for less than $2 a day. The regime has used this pretext to suspend the rule of law, the Constitution, and the National Assembly. Further, the regime has instituted very severe enforcement strategies to maintain these conditions. Sam touched on a lot of these, so they've used extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances, incommunicado detentions, torture, and no habeas corpus rights. The Commission found that detention is an ordinary fact of life and experienced by an inordinate number of individuals. Often prisoners are subject to torture and rape for even the most arbitrary behavior. In one instance, which the Commission cited, prisoners tortured for looking at guards with judging eyes. Now, the Commission holds no judicial or enforcement powers of their own and essentially acts as a watchdog, providing information to international agencies with the powers to act. Thus, the Commission concluded its March update warning that close scrutiny of the human rights situation in Eritrea by the international community will be crucial beyond the release of their final findings later this month. Now, the Commission has actually faced considerable difficulties in conducting their investigation. The biggest challenge to the investigation has been the complete non-cooperation by the Eritrean government. Repeated requests to visit Eritrea and requests for information have gone entirely unanswered by the Eritrean regime. Further, Eritrea has imposed severe access restrictions upon international organizations and researchers working in the field of human rights. However, the Commission has managed to work around these restrictions by interviewing over 400 Eritrean refugees in 8 countries to this point. While the Commission has managed to produce a fairly comprehensive investigation, the inability to investigate the sites of these human rights violations in Eritrea itself has certainly impacted their work. To further complicate the situation, Eritrea is one of the most closed-off societies in the world, and was actually named the world's most censored state in April of this year by the American nonprofit organization, the Committee to Protect Journalists. The committee found that only state media is allowed to disseminate news, with the last accredited international correspondent expelled in 2007. Even reporters who work for the state-censored media organization live in constant fear of arrest for any report that is perceived as critical of the ruling party or under suspicion of leaking information outside the country. Now, where is this all headed? Primarily, one of the potential outcomes is the prosecution of Eritrean officials. Obviously, one of the keys to stopping these violations is to stop the perpetrators. As such, the Afar have been demanding the arrest of several key Eritrean officials who've been implicit in these violations. They include Major General Karakari, who is currently the commander of the Eritrean Navy, and Major General Haile Samuel. In terms of the Afar specifically, recognition as an indigenous group with protected rights under international law is vitally important. Now, this is a tricky one because there's no single definition of what constitutes an indigenous person under international law. But lawyers working with the Afar have selected 4 criteria that sort of are pretty broadly accepted. These are the 4 that I've listed here. Prior occupation of defined territory, voluntary perpetuation of cultural distinctiveness, self-identification and identification by others as a distinctive community, and a situation of non-dominance. Now, regarding the first criteria, their presence on the African Horn in the non-Kalia region has been clearly documented since at least the 13th century. Further evidence has pointed out they have ancestral ties to the Ethiopian highlands, dating back to at least AD 1000, after which the Afar adopted a more nomadic lifestyle moving to their current territory. The second criteria, the Afar have a distinct language which can be traced back 5 millennia. Their status as nomadic pastoralists means that they have a close relationship with the land that forms an integral part of their identity. They also maintain distinctive economic pursuits, including the extraction and trade of salt from the saline lakes. They also practice a distinctive religion, which consists of Islam combined with their own traditional beliefs, which is in contrast to their predominantly Christian neighbors. They also practice a distinctive political structure based around clans and sultans. As for the third criteria, their distinctive language, economic pursuits, religious beliefs, and political structures all contribute to their self-identification as a distinctive community. However, their distinctiveness has also been recognized by others in their community. Their geographical and cultural identities have kept the Afar isolated from the Ethiopian state and were identified as Ethiopians at the margins in the 1970s by Jacques Van der Velde. Recently, the Ethiopian Federal Constitution established that part of the Afar territory within Ethiopia as a self-governing province. Further, the Afar Commission of Human People's Rights Working Group of experts on indigenous peoples and communities identified the Afar as an example of pastoralist indigenous group. Thus, the Afar met this by not only self-identifying as a distinctive community, but also by being identified by others. Lastly, until the 19th century, the Afar remained independent of outside control. Unfortunately, colonialism resulted in the traditional Afar territory being split between Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Djibouti. Since the secession of Eritrea in 1991, the Eritrean regime has been attempting to assimilate the Afar and cut off their ties to other Afar populations in Ethiopia and Djibouti. Thus, based on these criteria, it remains quite clear that the Afar certainly meet these well-established criteria for recognition as indigenous peoples. Based on this, it would not be a stretch to conclude that the Afar should be granted Aboriginal status, as well as subsequent rights as laid out by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Arguably, the most significant of these rights includes the right of self-determination, the rights to autonomy and self-government, as well as their rights to maintain their distinct political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions, and to not be forcibly removed from their homeland. This also includes the right to pass on to future generations their traditional ways of living. Ultimately, the Afar desire autonomy and the ability to self-govern and maintain control over their land, resources, culture, and identity. Based on the definition of Indigenous persons and the rights that have been established by the UN, it is easy to argue that the Afar are well within accepted international legal frameworks to demand these conditions. Why are we here? Why are we telling you this today? As I mentioned, part of the mandate of the Commission inquiry was to spread information regarding human rights abuses occurring within Eritrea. We're hoping to follow their example. International action is impossible without political support, which is unattainable without public awareness. For the last few months, we've been working with the co-founder and vice president of the Congo Afar Foundation and the Eritrean Afar State and Exile Group, who actually joined us today, in an attempt to organize evidence for the submission to the UN Human Rights Council Commission inquiry, which we submitted back in January, as well as raise public awareness of their situation. Now, the Congo Afar Foundation is a humanitarian organization that aims to empower the Afar by boosting awareness and advocacy for a voiceless population. The foundation also provides education, health, and food services to Afar that are in need. These goals are much more attainable with public support and awareness, and is a goal we are hoping to achieve. That about does it for us. So I guess we'll do questions.